Okay, it's just 2 minutes after 3. So we're going to get started and welcome everybody. On the behalf of the United Cerebral Palsy's Research Committee, I want to thank you all for attending the United Cerebral Palsy Professional Learning Series. I am Valerie Percini. I'm the Director of Therapy and the Early Learning Center at United Cerebral Palsy of Central Arizona. So we are here in Phoenix. Today's presentation is actually a collaboration between United Cerebral Palsy's Research Committee, Gillette Children's, and UCP of Central Arizona. The Professional Learning Center series, not center, series has plans for webinars already going into 2024. So we hope that you will continue to join us. Details are not yet on our website, but they will be going up soon as we solidify those speakers. We've already got the first part of the year planned. And you will see that information roll out to the registrants today. So today's speaker is Lisa Pinson. She is a pediatric physical therapist, and I just want to let you know that I met Lisa maybe 8 years ago, 7 years ago.
I think we brought our part of the study to you guys in 13 or 14. It could be 10 now.
Okay.
Maybe it's 14.
So she used to be an Arizona resident down in Tucson, and there was a national NIH clinical trial that was going on that included partners all across Arizona. And so that was our first meetup. And then since then, and she helped us with our training in PAA. So she was part of my first learning process. Although I learned about this approach when it was called something different than PAA, which is a whole nother story. But anyhow, Lisa started her career at Blythedale Children's Hospital. She's been a physical therapist for 26 years. She is the founding board member, former chair of marketing, and now is the current treasurer of the Institute of Perception Action Approach. She is now has now moved away from Arizona, so I don't get to see her as much, although we find ways to reconnect. Most recently at the Cerebral Palsy Foundation when she presented on this topic. So now she currently holds a position at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta in the Developmental Progress Clinic and Acute Rehab, doing research at Emory University in the School of Medicine's Baby Brain Optimization Project Research Lab. So we're very excited to have Lisa today. I, as a director, am excited about this approach to be able to instill it into our clinic. And so I'm excited to, I'm excited about everything. Looking forward to sharing it with you. Keep you overusing that word. So just so you know, this meeting is being recorded. We will not be taking questions during the presentation, but that you are more than welcome to be able to post those in the Q&A. And then at the very end, there will be a live Q&A that will begin immediately after the presentation. So I think that is, and you will see everything I just said up on the screen here. So I think with that business being done, I'm gonna just sign off here and turn it over to you, Lisa.
Awesome. I'll get ready to share once you're done sharing. So I do want to give a little preempt. Thank you, Valerie, for giving all of my stats. I had a little strange mishap this morning and woke up with a little bit of Bell's palsy. So if I become if you can't understand me, I think my voice is good, but I'm a little turned because this eye and this side of my face are not working so well. And I'm going to make myself nice and small in the corner here so that you don't have to really see me. All right, vanity and all that. I'm sorry, I'm a little visually impaired, so I need to get myself on my slideshow. Okay. And taking just a second to load. Please let me know if for whatever reason you don't see it. At the moment it's black, so that's not all that helpful.
It's definitely giving you the spiral of death, isn't it?
It
Or
isn't
not
it?
death.
It is. I mean, worst case scenario is you get to see the slides that are coming up, and we do it in a
And remember, Carrie
not
also
so
has some
gorgeous
too for you.
format, which would be par for the day, wouldn't it? Not
Yes.
necessarily looking gorgeous. Okay. Let's... All right.
And Lisa, your voice is
yeah.
very clear. So if you're having a
Okay,
bad day,
good.
we can hear you.
Good. I appreciate that. All right. You know what? I think I'll just stop share and go back to because it's taking an awful lot of time.
Yeah.
I've never seen that before. So let's try again. And sorry, y'all. Technical, it wouldn't be anything if it weren't technical difficulties, right?
I agree.
I don't know why program itself doesn't needs to. Okay, let's try this again. And I apologize if it's not so pretty. And we'll just go from there. Does everybody see my screen now?
I do.
Okay. Okay, great. All right, so this is the role of perception, action, and learning, and the implications for assessment and intervention for children with movement disorders. And you know, I think I'm going to see everything on my screen. I think it was nice for Valerie to have an opportunity to come and see some of the things that we got to work with together so many years ago. And that research, I was hoping to have some preliminary data for you, but it's about to be published. They're in editing, and our PI, Duke Duncan out of Tucson, is keeping it very close to the vest. He apologized to me, but he was not ready. So we won't have that, but we will have a lot of other things to talk about. So obviously you've already heard a little of my background. I've been a pediatric PT for a long time. Most of my efforts have been in clinical, from the clinical side and more the younger patients. I do a lot in the NICU now, but I started really going into research back in about 2011, 2012. And now I'm doing work at the Baby Brain Optimization Project, which is part of our School of Medicine here at Emory. We're doing some interesting studies and working on putting a study together on perception action right now. So hopefully, that's obviously years down the line, but hopefully we'll have some even newer information coming out. Today, we're going to really look at sort of the change in what is happening in the industry, and where we need to look to take our theory, because we know our theory, a lot of good theory, and it's been out there for a long time. We're going to do sort of a little bit of a review of a few pieces, but it's really about figuring out how to take that theory, and we say use the evidence and put it into clinical practice, but we've really struggled in the clinical side of rehab to make that jump away from the things that we are learning don't work and we've proven over and over don't work, and bringing the theory we know does work and connecting it to our practice. So that's what we're really going to try and look at. And I would never say that the perception action approach, which is what I teach and what Valerie and I were talking about, is one of the approaches that I think really sticks to this evidence, and we'll talk about that. There, I'm sure, are others out there. So this is not just about perception action approach, though we are going to go into some specifics on it. This is about that shift to what we know now from in the research. And we're going to look at that a bit. So we're going to talk about how we can look at perception action in theory and how we can bring those concepts and what we see into the practice. This is not advancing on me. There it goes. So our learning objectives for today are to define perception action and its role in learning, and how children use the information in the environment to make the adjustments to learn and advance movement goals. We're generally talking about movement goals, but a lot of this can transcend across learning goals. So we do a lot of work in movement because I'm a PT, OT, speech working together, but a lot of this is just about learning in general. The founding theoretical concepts for sort of the universal founding theoretical concepts for learning are really these three. And we're going to touch really briefly on dynamic systems and neuronal group selection so that we have the context, but we're going to delve more into perception action. And, you know, our most recent research, for example, Iona Novak's paper in 2017, and then Veld and Novak just came out in 2022, is really emphasizing the self-driven spontaneous movement, child-driven movement, repetition, task-oriented learning model. And this is really where we're looking to take what is normal in the learning process and sort of figure out how we can best serve our demographic, our kids who are struggling with that learning process comparatively. So we're going to take a quick look at dynamic systems. This, I didn't want to buy. So I'm in like editing mode or something. Okay, we'll just go with that. So dynamic systems, something that we've all really kind of heard of over the last, few years, sort of the chaos theory that, the butterfly can flap its wings and change the weather somewhere else. And what it's really about is that we have these nonlinear self-organizing systems that are contained by parameters in the environment and constraints in the environment or within the system itself. And these systems want to organize in a patterned way. They it likes its particular flow, but it's always got changes happening. There's always a dynamic to it. There's always an adjustment. And really the only part of this dynamic system that we're going to go into is the attractor, because it's going to come up later a little bit when we're looking at how we look at our kids. And our attractors are these, what we call these wells of attraction. So we have a system that maybe has a particular flow to it, but it has a spot that it always kind of tries to go back to. And these are our patterns. We all have them. I prefer to sit in a chair with my right leg over my left leg. That is my attractor. But because I have a normally developed nervous system and an integrated sensory system, I can cross my left leg over my right if there is a reason. For example, a post to a chair, to the table I'm sitting at is in my way to cross my right over my left. I can switch things around. So I have a variability, which we're going to talk about, and adjustability in my system. So my attractor for that is kind of shallow. But when we think about our kids, their attractors can be very strong, and we can maybe with our hands move them out of them. But what we want to be able to do is where they can move out of them at will and have change in that pattern. And often what we see is this pattern carries over. If we really like that, adducted thigh position for control in upright, you're going to see that every time we try to move, because this attractor is so strong, and this is where the system feels like it has control. So we're looking at ways to change that, to disturb the attractor really. And any reorganization of the system different from that pattern is an opportunity for the nervous system and the perceptual system to learn. And so that's really what we look at when we look at perception action. So Neuronal group selection, which is the other part of, I like this little video because all connected. I call this sort of like the pruning of the bonsai tree. And this is really comes into play where it's important that the movement is spontaneous and self-directed, that the movement is trial and error, so that as those errors happen, we prune those pathways for those most efficient things. And these are the things that need to be salient to the child. The adaptive value of the activity, the more the child is interested in the activity, the more they're repeating it, the more they want it, the more they're working at it, the better these pathways develop, even just neurochemically, but also the better that pruning is. And this enables us to be able to take an activity and carry it over multiple dynamics. And we're going to talk about that as we go. So neuronal group selection, and dynamic systems are sort of these three concepts with perception action. They really can't be separated. They can be defined individually, but they really cannot be separated. So we're going to focus on the perception action theory because this is the point at which this is the point at which we work in perception action approach to bring something in to help change that system and disrupt that attractor, right? And I love this little video, if it'll play, because it really shows perception action is not a loop. It is a online, in real time interaction between the environment and all the components of the individual, internally and externally. As this person on the slack rope line shifts their weight, the surface for which they're getting their information changes. And every little bit of information is in a constant flow. So this is not a cycle. I do this, that happens, then that's the response. This is a constant flow of information that is happening all the time. And that's a real component to how our children typically learn. So then the question really is, how do we get from, this baby who is very limited by gravity and with little volitional movement, how do we get from there to doing something as simple as a simple task like hands together and bringing the toy to midline. And then in a very short period of time, we're getting upright, in this case, our supported walker, and moving through to really complicated tasks, if you think about it. This child has a really complicated set of movements happening here. Between the postural control and the upper extremities and the weight of the toy, this is a pretty advanced, complex activity. And we want that for our kids. We want them to be able to not just sit up, but to really dynamically sit up, to participate, to activate, and to have that complexity of movement. So in the learning process, we take a lot of information, we're going to be slow on time. We take a lot of information from our environment and we adjust that information based on our previous experiences, right? So for example, if you were to pick up something next to your computer right now, you could pick it up and bring it to your face successfully. You can do that because you've had trial and error over and over and over of all different information that your body has picked up this information and it can transcend it across tasks. So if the coffee was hot, if the orientation of the handle was different, if the cup was soft, like a Dixie cup, and you were to grab it, you would grab it differently and still be successful. And this is that carryover that we really need to be able to find for our kids. That's really what we're looking for. So we talk about, I like this little video, where does it all start? I am more, there's going to be a lot more babies in here than older kids. I think I've got one example of an older child, and that's really because that's my area. But we do perception action approach across all age levels and fine learning at all age levels. But what we're looking at here is that sort of variability of movement. And I might mute her. This is a 32-week gestational baby. And in the picture, you can see that she's playing with her feet. Her body's moving. At this point, her sensory system allows her to feel, to hear, to see, to taste, and even to smell. And so those sensory systems in for this baby are giving her a lot of information, even in utero. Once we're born, all this information is part of between the experience of it, the maturation of the system, and all the information coming in is where we get our behavior, communication, cognition, and motor behavior. So where there is this disconnect between what sensory information might be picked up, and we're going to talk about that, that information can really affect our long-term developmental abilities, right? So that active pickup and that sensory motor systems are very integrated, especially in the neonatal child, right? This is why even in utero or in the PICU, we do, in the NICU, we do a lot of motor movement to stimulate what would be happening in utero if the baby were to go to term. So our preterm babies miss out on all this particular vestibular stimulation sitting in the NICU because their mother would be moving all the time. And that sensory system, vestibular system, really helps develop the motor system and vice versa. And when you're swaddled tightly in a isolette, you're not getting any of that. So, we work at the early stages to try and develop that system as more typical as we can. But that active pickup, the perceptual information, that is really where a lot of our kids struggle. It's not just the picking up of what they want or need for the task, which is super important. It is the ability to disregard the information that they don't want for the task as well, right? So how do we enable that to happen? And this perception action is hyphenated and occurs together because it happens in real time all the time. So I love these snowboarders because if you think about it, they're getting a tremendous amount of vestibular information, sensory information, the shifting of the support surface, the visual of the sun across the snow gives them some information about the terrain, that shift, and they're very focused and they're very skilled at this point. They are able to disregard probably the wind or the falling snow or the things that they don't need to complete the task. But if for some reason, like somebody were to come by and yell on your left, they would hear that and adjust to it, right? So it's that picking it up of what's important so that we can really meet the task. And our kiddos just really tend to struggle with that. What's the relevant information and how do I use that in my body, use that in my environment, in my dynamic system, which is the child and the environment together to meet the task at hand. So our little baby here, no, it doesn't like to listen over there. So, Adolph did a lot of research on early movement, and she really found that movement was necessary for the pickup of information. And if you look at this little baby, as she's watching the toy, as she shifts her weight and watches, and you see her kicking and her hand moving around and her head moving, every little weight shift, every little movement of her belly on the surface, her hands and legs on the surface, gives her body information about itself and about her environment. That support surface contact and the weight shift is really key to her being able to understand. And then I could even go back to it. She gets to a point where she can anticipate. She's tracking at first, but then I can anticipate when it's coming. Oh, there it is. And I can anticipate where it's going to go. And that's a bit of really where we want to be. we want to be in a place where we understand the situation and the environment enough in our body that we don't think about stepping up the curb when we walk across the street and go up the curb. We have it in our system enough that we can anticipate it without thinking about it. So these three theories, dynamic systems, neuronal group, and perception action, are always at play in the learning process. But the vehicle by which they come to be is that spontaneous movement and exploration. And this is really where it's an important part of what we know about the learning system. The movement needs to be self-generated. It needs to come from and be salient to the child. So this spontaneous exploration is often limited in our kids who might have had limited exposure to movement, to environments, either due to just illness in general, lack of mobility, limited interactions, right? So that spontaneous exploration of the environment is very key to us being able to pick up the needed information and make our way into a place where we can take that, learn enough about our body, and move on. So I love this little video too. So the exploratory behavior, which generates all the crucial information, the active spontaneous movement, that weight shift, the tactile experience, the working against gravity. This child's obviously not his first time climbing. The ability to go up based on this change of the grade and shift and change and step around and ignore or work around the leaves and all of the other sensory things like the wind and whatever noises, and he can achieve the task, right? But this is the information that that's self-driven and very important for the system to be able to learn. And this child shows a lot of variability in his movement. And variability, which we're going to talk about, actually we'll talk about next, I think, yep. That variability of movement, the ability to be in multiple sitting positions, to change as we need to, and to adapt or to have that variable movement so we can adapt as the task adapts and changes is really the key. And so Hatters-Alger back in 2010, and then recently again, I think it was closer to 2018, has done, and it'll be in my references, has done a lot of research on variability of movement and how it changes with maturation, and also how it changes when we have disturbance in the developmental system. So let's look at this. I'm working off two computers here, so I'm getting myself confused. This is from, like, just pictures directly from her 2010 study. What I love about them is they're really good at showing the change. So, you know, on our left, your left, is a 2-month-old in supine. And this is a 2-minute or 3-minute, sorry, clip of this child. And in supine, all the movement that you see. And we look at this a lot. I do a lot of research in general movement assessment. So early in the NICU and then up through, like, you know, 12, 14 weeks post-term, maybe up to 16 weeks post-term. We look at all this sort of variability of movement. And this child, for a 2-month-old, has quite a bit. But if you look at the picture next to him, just typical maturation, look at how much more movement the child at 8 months has. And legs up in the air, feet off the ground, the rotation, the head up. There's a lot more happening, even in that normal maturation. And what happens to a lot of our kiddos is somewhere in here, we lose our ability to be variable, and we get into one pattern of movement or two patterns of movement that really support what we feel like we can control, and then we use it over and over and over again, that attractor well, and struggle to move out of it. So in this next picture, you see two 11-month-olds. I believe they're 11 months old. One's 11, one's 10. The one on the left Again, 3 minutes. This is a 3-minute still clips in 3 minutes of how much variability in their sitting position they have. And you can see side sit, you can see long sit, you can see ring sit, you can see, you know, halfway over to almost a side, you know, side sit, crawling. This child's feet are everywhere, right? And in that, the child next to her on the right is a 10-month-old who has some developmental delays. So look at her 3-minute pattern. This is it. And think about the limitation in her exploration, even from a cognitive standpoint of what she's able to figure out about her environment because of this limitation, because this is the movement pattern that she has. Her legs in that long sit, she stays there. If the toy is put to the side in the bottom left corner, she's, you know, provided a reaching opportunity. There's some rotation, but no real weight shift. So in this case, this child's variability is quite limited. So our first sort of look at things is, well, how can we provide opportunities of exploration? How can we provide affordances in the environment so that our children can explore more, so that they can move more, so that they can learn? And this is one way I really get a lot of buy-in from the parents, because no matter what the diagnosis you've been given, every parent wants that cognitive opportunity, right? And learning and exploration helps to build the cognitive side as well. So we get that grounded cognition and cognitive development through these learning opportunities. As we get that opportunity to learn and we have some variability in our system, we can then adapt. So this little boy in the video has taken the opportunity to use this box in his environment. He's obviously had some help from someone to create his little rocket and his helmet. But he has the ability to take this and use it to his best play advantage. And as he's doing it, and if you watch, as he shifts his head forward, his box is a little heavy and it falls forward. But he's able then to adapt. He's able to put it back up and then realize, if I don't tip my head so far forward, I will be able to keep this box on my head. So there's the adaptation, right? We need that ability to adapt as the task changes, as the environment changes, so that we can be more successful. And as we're more successful, then that neural group selection occurs, that pruning of our motor, you know, of our nervous system. And now us in this dynamic system of this play experience, we're really able to move in and out of whatever attractor for this child. Maybe his attractor is to lean forward when he sits, but he's able to sit upright to keep his helmet on because that's important to him. And again, that's the key. And it needs to be important to him. I have this little video. I know several people who are on here and probably have seen it. It's very pretty. I don't know, Valerie, do you think we have time? I don't want to push the time frame, but this is a little bit about affordances and the environment. And you could tell me if you think it's too long and we can skip it. It's about 2 minutes.
No, can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
I know you've seen it, so.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, I wasn't sure. No, I think it's fine. We have time because we have an hour and a half. And you know what? I was sticking your computer on the very right, on the green, the very top green bar. Wondering if you can make your, I know you can't get full screen with your PowerPoint, but can you get your screen fuller? Do you know what I'm saying? Go there, right there. Try, see if that goes bigger because it's too big. Okay, so minimize it then. All right, never mind. Just a thought.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, we have time. Go for it.
Okay. All right. I can try again to get to the presenter mode, but I hate to be stuck in the middle. Okay, so this was made by Patty Gallo. She's a perception action approach instructor, and she presented this with me at CPF. Valerie was there. But this really lends to the idea of the environmental affordance or setup. And we're going to talk later about sort of the components of perception action approach as a treatment. the environmental setup is really one of the keys. We want it to be child-driven, but we can set up the environment, we can provide the affordances to get what we want. So I let the child lead, but I don't let the child go willy-nilly. I set up my environment as best I can so that the child will be able to meet some of the tasks that I think are pushing them to their next outcome, right? So this is a little video on affordance. Here, we'll try that. Make it as big as possible. Okay. So really what we are looking at here is how does the environment in the dynamic system of the child's learning and the child with the environment, this constant flow, how can we how do we use our environment to explore? And how can we then as therapists use our environment to provide that affordance, to provide that opportunity so that we can get more exploration and self-driven movement, because that's really where our learning is going to come from. So perception, here we go. So we've so far talked about sort of those dynamic systems and that perception action theory, neuronal group selection, and the environment being used to provide spontaneous exploration or opportunity for spontaneous exploration. And that's really where we begin with perception action approach. That's really the first thing. So if a child's exploring on their own and moving, and I can make a small adjustment to the environment to get a change in the pattern, I will. And a very simple example of this would be for your kiddo who's got a positional torticollis, for example, where, you know, they always want to look to the left. Now, we might make these changes incrementally, because if a child's looking to the left all the time and I put the toy to the right completely, they are not going to see it. Incremental change where they make the movement, where the toy goes from the left to maybe, 10 o'clock to noon to 1 to 2, incremental changes of the toy position, of the interaction, so that the child can be successful in small incremental movements that the body can really learn and understand. Quick movement over and movement back, unsustained, not so self-driven, maybe it's self-driven, but unsustainable, doesn't allow the exploration of the toy, which then loses some of its salience, but it also doesn't allow the exploration in the position of the body to feel itself. So we look at changing the environment, whether that's the setup of the surface, maybe the child really struggles because of hamstring range to do seated activities on the floor, but if you can change up the support surface underneath them, then they have more ability to sit and explore in that position, right? As opposed to you sitting them, changing the surfaces around them so that they can sit and it's more self-driven. So why is perception action approach what I'm speaking about? It's that it meets those criteria that are talked about in Novak's couple of papers and in a lot of the research over the last really 10 to 15 years, that we need that self-generated movement. We need active problem solving and that trial and error so that we can get that pruning so that there's carryover. That repetitive practice and that interest is great, but the carryover from not just your session to the next session, but your session to when they walk out the door and the environment's completely different. From the changeover from when the environment changes, that change in task shifts and that they have that carryover. And we, in order to do that, we really have to have these components that, task specific, trial and error, repetition, active problem solving, and self-generated. And perception action is a treatment type that enables that to happen. It is not the only way out there. It is just one, and the one I know, one of the ones I know. So the primary concepts in that perception action approach are that variability to adaptability of movement, and that's really where we almost start. That's our sort of assessment starts here in variability and adaptability, and it's the relationship to the support surface and to gravity. And let me explain where this sort of comes from. Ingrid Scharneuter, who was the sort of founder of this approach, though it was called TOMO at the time, which Valerie alluded to before, she was an NDT instructor who started looking at things a little differently. And what her different look was more on the idea of these universal constants that all learning has to happen from. So her husband was a physicist. That's why she started looking into dynamic systems theory and all of that. Back then, a lot of chaos theory. This was in the early 90s. And what she tried to do was kind of scientifically think, well, what are the invariants? And all movement has these two universal constants. It's gravity is always universal, and you must have a support surface to work off of, push off of, to move, just as in the laws of physics, right? So without a support surface, without something to push off of, we can't generate movement. And neither could a car, for example. It doesn't have to be a person. It has to push off a surface to generate forward propulsion. So the same for gravity, right? As being an invariant. It is always there, it is always constant, and it helps us by giving us information into the support surface, weight in a way, a force into the surface, but we also have to work against it to activate. So this relationship with gravity can be kind of tricky, right? We need to use it and we need to, I don't want to say fight it, but we need to be able to activate against it as well. So she really looked at that support surface and contact and the physical action off the support surface, the force up, ground force up, and the force down of gravity, and how these two things came together And a lot of her patients really were struggling with that component of how to activate and control themselves with all the gravitational forces and using them, but still being able to overcome them. So we're going to look at it this way. So think about these two kiddos and look at how they are interacting with the support surface. The child on the left has very little contact points with the support surface. The heels, really just the lateral border of the heel, the ischial tuberosities. He's really holding on his shins and that forward shin and just holding on to stay there. He's not using the surface to really push off of. He's kind of pulling up instead of pushing down into the surface, but pulling up to fight to stay up. Whereas our child on the right has lots of contact, a nice wide base of support, but very poor activation of that support surface, down so that she can get up. So she can generate enough information force down to activate her trunk up. And her weight in this case then shifts very forward, and her center of mass is way over her legs, and she really holding on with her arms behind her to counterbalance herself. And think about what happens for both of these children oral motorly, right? How much just lip closure, breath, breathing, fine motor activity. Like, this is not just about sitting. This is an overall, situation where we're not getting the opportunity to do everything from, cognitive play, exploration, speech and language, fine motor, gross motor, and even respiratory is affected. So we look at a lot of this. When I first see a kiddo, this is the first thing I'm sort of getting a look at. How do they interact with the support surface? Where are they active? Where are they not? Are they in contact? That kind of thing. So let's do a little, so you can feel it a little bit, a little quick assessment. Without moving at all, in your chair right now, let's see how you're sitting. So feel where you're in contact with your chair, where your feet might be in contact with the floor, whether you have a back to your chair, if you're leaning back, or if you're leaning forward on the table. Are you weight bearing through your upper extremities at all? Do you have a leg tucked up underneath you? That kind of thing. Feel your contact points and where you are and where your weight is. And now, if I were to say to you that you needed to stand up, what would you have to do to start that transition? You don't even have to do it at this point, but just think about where you'd have to shift, what you'd have to do, how you'd have to adjust your feet, how you would, change your weight shift in your current sitting position in order to be able to prepare to stand up, not even, just the standing up. And so we look at that. And for example, our W sitter here, right? W sitting, this is our big controversial, whatever. I think about this with our variability. We know lots of kids who W sit, who can also ring sit, long sit, and side sit, and move in and out of sit. And because they can do that spontaneously, W sit is not an issue. But if W sit becomes the only way you can sit, if this is your attractor and you cannot move out of it so that you can't adjust to maybe get the toy all the way outside your base of support to the left or right, then we have a problem, right? Then you've lost variability and an inability to adapt to the tasks at hand as it arises, which limits your exploration, limits your learning, limits in all areas. So thinking about that sitting up task, this is a quick little video, kind of just thinking about those points of contact. So where is our center of mass and our contact point? Where do we have to generate a force from to get up to standing? right? We have to, we know this for a lot of our kids. They tend to want to push into extension and push backward, right? Can they get to standing that way? No. They really have to shift and generate a force that moves forward where the weight shift can transition from the buttocks through the thighs into the feet to transition, and even some excursion forward. So that transitional point, this is sort of what we really look at in perception action approach. So there's 3 aspects to the treatment. There's the environmental setup, there's the manual guidance, which we're going to talk about, and I'm going to get to show you some video. And then there's the parent education. We have an entire course on environmental setup, just how you can set up and change environments. This is really nice for, telehealth. This kind of came about a little bit more too. We've always done it, but the telehealth thing during COVID really brought that to light. What can we really do with environmental setup and parent education? And so I put these kind of 2 together. This is a quick video. This is actually Joyce Bennett. She's up in Alaska. She's an instructor for us and on our board of directors. And this young lady came into her for a consultation. This is her first time ever seeing her. And in this consultation, the dad said that she had a Convade there, and she has some other chairs that she uses at home, a Riften, things. But when asked, he said, no, she cannot sit up on her own. But what happened, is this video going to play? Maybe not. Okay, well, as you can see in this video, she's sitting up on the bench. So what happened was they just changed the support surface. And for the first time, because in I don't know how many years, because this young lady is 23, I believe, in this video, she sat up without the back to a chair. And, because she didn't have one. And she had enough perception to know when she sort of shifted back. I don't know if you can tell, Joyce's leg is there, but then she moved it away and she shifted forward and kept herself from falling. And it really was just the change of the environment, the change of the support surface. Now, could she tolerate for long periods? No, but she could do it. And in this video, which I wish we could see, she maintained it for a couple of minutes, actually. In this, Joyce then instructed the parents on the family, because their goal was that they'd be able to go to a restaurant with her and that she'd be able to sit in they were looking actually in the beginning equipment, but then they thought, well, we could get to a chair in a restaurant. And by just educating the parents and checking in with them, she did not follow this adult, ongoing for PT. She lived very remote in Alaska and she had a PT. But she just educated the parents on building this affordance opportunity, giving her little cues on where her body was. And she was able to, within, I think it was about 6 months, that they were able to get to a chair in a restaurant. So that's that combination of changing the environment, changing the surface, providing a different opportunity, and then the parent education on how they can incorporate that. And they started incorporating it at home in small bursts, and then taking it to a kitchen chair, and then where she was a little bit higher off the ground and with some foot support, and then, with less foot support, and so on. Okay, so that's that. Those 2 pieces we really start with are that environmental setup and affordance, and the parent education. And then we move into the manual guidance. So we're going to talk a little bit about what manual guidance is. This is a tough one to do via video because obviously can't see it directly. But we're going to talk through it a little, and I'm going to give you a little of the theory background just so you know where it came from. All the way back in 1966, Gibson did a lot of work on how we learn and how we create, an orientation of our body and postural control and all of that. And he looked at the vestibular components, the mechanical receptor or tactile components, and then the proprioceptive or kinematic components, and then visual and all of that. Pickens did more of this, or Pick did more of this in 92. This has been repeated many, many times. I like to shout out to Gibson because he was sort of the founder of a lot of this. So, but that more information, that detection of more information, the sensory pickup of somatosensory information helps us to learn more, to get postural control, but also to learn more about our body, its orientation to the support surface, gravity, and the environment. And that's really what we look at. And how do we bring it into practice? This is where we're trying to bridge that gap. So in perception action, we look at how the child's moving, how they're interacting with their support surface, and providing those environmental stimuli, but then using the idea was Ingrid wanted to give more information to the child. How can the child have better information about themselves and their relationship to those two things? And what she came up with was the work through Yeka and Chen, and we're going to talk about them next on light touch. So this baby, for example, you can see he has some errors, right? In that every time he weight shifts to that side, he isn't generating to the left, he isn't generating enough force to keep himself upright, right? So from a perception action approach, from the manual guidance, we would look to give him more information about how to shift into that side to activate and generate a force into the surface so that he can lift and maintain his head off the ground. So that light touch. What we know from the studies of Yeka, Chen, Fu, these will be all my references, is that, and we know this from ourselves, when you just walk and slide your finger across the wall, you have more balance control, right? We get even though you're not really getting a stationary component from that finger, that light touch gives us enough information about our body that we can control our postural sway better. And that was sort of the work that started with Yeka and was repeated. And so, and we know this, they did this, Chen did this work with, you notice that surfers dragged their hands in the water and they got better information, not just about their own body, but about the nature of the movement of the surface underneath them, the wave, the whatever. So in this case, we're providing light touch information so that the child, in this case, or an adult, can get more somatosensory, mechanical, receptor, proprioceptive, kinematic information about where they are in relationship to gravity, and then how can they move. So I'm going to move a little faster. So in this case, the environment is set up. The task is there. The child wants that toy. The getting up the stairs, the task. In this case, the therapist provides light touch information down through where there's contact into the support surface. So the foot is touching and giving that light information to say, here's where you are. And then if you were to shift your weight just a little bit, and she just suggested, we never want to move the child because we want them to do the movement so they can learn it. But she gives this light information. This is where your weight shift, this is where you're touching the ground, and this is where your weight shift needs to go. A little bit lateral, a little bit forward, and we're successful with the climb. So in manual guidance, we provide what we call a vector, where we put our hand on as lightly as we possibly can. We want to be almost imperceivable. And we just, right where the child is, where their center of mass is, give them a downward vector into the support surface to give them information about where they are. It's very grounding, but it's very light. And it's just to say, this is where your body is. Do you know where you are? And then we provide a change in the direction of that vector to suggest where they might go next. Now, we try to be, this is very hard, as you're goal directed and you want to make outcomes, but we try to think and predict ahead of time where they might want to go based on how we've set up the environment. But we do not force that to happen that way. And if the child makes a change in a totally different direction, we go with it. Because I want anything different than that attractor well. I want anything that's a change, because anything outside of that well is a phase shift and a learning opportunity for the system. So I can have my task, in this case, our sit to stand, where the blue represents my vector. My hands would be at her upper trunk this way, and my vector would be down towards the support surface and suggesting that next step. Now I could match her and just go with her, but if I want a direction of movement, I would suggest, now she might not. She might be resistant to that because vestibularly it makes her feel like she's going to fall, for example. In that case, then I would move back and try I would let her go with it, but I would never force past that point. And this is something if you come to a class and you do handling, you actually can feel. Very hard to see in video, but we try never to push. Okay. So that is a general idea. So we apply a vector. It starts where the therapist hand is at the body surface. It is always where the child is in contact, never where the child is where you want them to go. It is where they already are in contact. You start where they are, you match the action or the task of the child, and you provide information about their somatosensory interaction between the support surface and gravity and where they could go next. I don't know. We're going to go straight to, let's go straight to a little, so we have some time for discussion. This is Isabella, Bella. She's in this was back in 2017 at a course at Texas Tech. So I believe, I'm pulling it up on my other computer. Okay. So she was 16 months old at the time. She's typical birth, and then had infantile spasms, atonic seizures, ocular motor apraxia, and some obvious, as you're going to see. So this was a demo. I'd never met her before. She was new to me. So I came in pretty blind. They always like to give you the hardest one for the demo. And she's very sweet. But this is her movement pattern and her interaction with the support surface. It is literally her heels. And if you could hear her mom in the background, if I wasn't talking, you hear her say, this is what she does all day. This is how she moves around the house. She does some rolling this way. She cannot get up to sit. She can do some sitting placed. We'll look at that. But what I wanted you to see here is, even when she isn't in the arch, there is no contact of her lower back, her pelvis on the surface. She is either the tip of her head and her heels, or she is like this when she's in supine. And then, come on. So this is her placed in prone. And just think about, we talked about attractor pattern. This is her attractor. She has learned extension from the tongue all the way down to her toes. She is always extended. Even when she gets her legs down, her toes are like tucked under and, kind of pushing. So this is her movement pattern. And even in sitting, I have a brief second or two in sitting. She's kind of leaning on me a little. And then when she isn't leaning on she flops. This is her sit. Then she can make it back up, but she can't really stay there. And if I take my hands up, she flops. So that's her sitting at the beginning. So you can see she extended legs, not a lot of good interaction with the supports, a lot of activity against gravity though, right? She's got a lot of activity up, but not a lot of grounding down. All right, let's look at a little bit of treatment. We will see where we are. I'll play a good part of this, but maybe not the whole 7 minutes. So I tried at first to work with her in supine, and she was just off the surface so much that I couldn't get good contact points. And my goal here was to get some interaction with her lower extremities into the support surface. And all we're doing here, she's got a toy, and she's visually, got some impairment. So it's a toy with noise her parents brought. The darkness of my shirt she seemed to like, and I'm singing to her. And I'm going with her as she goes. And as she comes up, I shift more cranially. As she drops down, I try and shift more caudally. And I try to give her the opportunity and information about maybe getting some contact to her thighs. I would have loved to have seen some contact through, her shin. At this point, she's doing a lot of wiggling back and forth and getting a lot of information. And that's really all I'm looking for from her. At one point, and I don't know how I might have to speed it along because we're very slow in our practice. It's really about, if we can be, I'd like it to be that way. Obviously, you have the kiddos that are just moving. That's a lot harder. You got to move your vector all the time. You got to be moving with them all the time. Sometimes an environment that's more containing works for that. But we stayed here and just worked on trying to get pelvic interaction with the support surface, thigh interaction with the support surface, and her tongue. She was mouthing, but her tongue was out the whole time. Her tongue comes in a little bit at one point. I give her a little shift. She decides she wants to roll, and I go with it, right? Now, she can roll at home, but she always rolled in extension with that, as her mom described in the beginning. She rolled with that, and the minute she goes back, her attractor is there. And I try to get her down with the environmental affordance of the toy. Now you can see she's got a little bit more contact with her lower trunk, but not a lot. We did not have a lot. I worked here for a bit. I tried to stay with her here. She wanted to go up. I'm not pushing. I get this question, actually. I'm not trying to push her down. I'm trying to, that one arm stays in contact with the floor. And so I think, okay, let's stay in contact with the floor and see if she'll do a lateral weight shift. She doesn't stay there for very long. So I try to move. And I'm just looking for anywhere she's in contact that I can give her information. This is your body. This is where you have to weight shift through. And then she rolls back. But that roll uses a lot of that extension, unlike the roll bite before. So I don't know that we'll stick through this whole thing because a lot of that is this. She does, by the end of the session, she's getting tired now. But this is her therapist sitting next to me. Had been seeing her for 6 months, twice a week, I believe, and had never gotten her more than 20 minutes of a session because she was just exhausted and she'd get overwhelmed. And the therapist, this point, we're about 45 minutes in. So she tolerated because it is so light, it is self-driven, it is her, getting to move and play. She tolerated it really well. And we're 50 minutes into the session here, I think. But what I wanted to show here is she, for the first time, and I say it's trial and error because it's really not pretty, but she's trying to figure out how to get up. And this is her first time coming up to sitting. And over the left. So this was just an opportunity for her to like explore weight shifting through the floor and how to make some changes. And we really got some nice change. So at the end, when we look at her sitting, now she doesn't need to lean on me. But the most important part of this, from my perspective, is she plays around with her feet. Yeah, that's what Lisa Schur is there teaching with me. She moves into her tractor. And then she adjusts it. She's even looking. She wants to. Now I give a little, it's hard to take your hands off sometimes. I give a little cue, but oh, she plays around with it. She comes into a ring sit. She's able to sustain upright more. She's got more mobility in her feet and activity in her feet. And she's doing, yeah, some exploratory weight shifts through her pelvis that she had not been doing before because she would just fold over. And there we go. Then we fold over. So she's getting very tired at this point. So the idea is really that we want to let the child drive the situation, but we want to have in our understanding what their attractor patterns are, what their relationship is with the support surface, how they interact, where they can be productive against gravity and into the support surface, where they aren't, and how to incrementally give them information so that they can make the adjustment, they can generate the activity, and so that they can learn. And the carryover, really, I don't have a post for her. I wish I did, where I could see, often when we do our 5-day, we'll see a kid in the beginning and then, you can see carryover even, 3 or 4 or 5 days later, have them come back. But I don't have that in this. I could always supply some videos with that from other therapists or for other kiddos. But manual guidance. So it's always about allowing for small changes, errors. It doesn't have to look pretty. It doesn't have to be a good pattern. We don't inhibit movement at all, and we don't passively move at all. Now, sometimes I will change a child's position so that I can get a better contact. So for example, I started in supine with her and she was so bowed, I couldn't get her into roll. So I moved her manually, passively to prone and then worked there. And then we worked some rolling. But sometimes I'll sit a child up if their position on the floor is just so held by gravity and they do better. I can get more movement and mobility upright. Or I will maybe, if I'm even working on getting more active legs, I can sometimes, work on walking in prone. So I might have the child lay down who's even walking, and we work on weight shift through the pelvis to figure out that weight shift and activation and then move it up into standing. But again, this is anything that I move, I know it's just about creating an environment. It's not about a learning opportunity. When I move them, they don't learn. They only learn when they move themselves. And what we're looking for is anything different. We want that disruption in the attractor, disruption in the pattern, and the opportunity for any reorganization, restructure of the system, that phase shift in that moment when you come out of that attractor wheel, that tipping point is where learning happens in the system. So that's really what we're looking for. And I'm not looking for normal movement patterns. I'm looking for variability in movement pattern. I'm looking for adaptability in task options and affordance and variability in the movement pattern itself. So I don't need it to look normal, but I do need it to look like you could do it in multiple ways. And that's really what I'm looking for a learning opportunity. So I threw in this slide because I wanted to know what research is out there right now, what things that have been being worked on and where you might be able to find it on perception action, and hopefully some more stuff to come. And I'll give a quick summary and then we can get some questions. So just perception action is the exacting of the meaningful information from the environment, and its action so that you can adapt an action, and the leaving or the disregarding of the information that's not helpful to the task, right? So that can be hard. That exchange of information, that self-activation, right? There's the 4 primary concepts: that interaction with the support surface, that orientation to gravity, that variability in our movements as we interact with the support surface and work against gravity, and then our ability to adapt as the task shifts and changes. Those are the 4 concepts that we're really looking for. And then our manual guidance is where we provide more information. That is really the task. We want to do it. We almost want to, it would be wonderful if we could do it without even laying hands on, but we haven't figured, we do it some by setting up the environment to provide information about the task and about how to move and activate through the environmental setup. But the manual guidance, we want to be as light as possible. We do not want to move them. We just want to give information that lets them know more about their body so that they can activate, so that they can make that learning leap. And we do that through those concepts of the invariant of gravity and support surface contact in that point, that intersection of activation of where the child is and how, from a very straightforward, regular high school physics level, they are able to generate a force for a movement in a direction. Okay, so I'm gonna have, I always have a little slide thanking Ingrid for all the work that she did. She really was a pioneer and thought very outside the box. And so this is really an important part of the process from making things happen in therapy. I mean, I think it's really tough to have pioneers because we are taught a certain way and really be able to think outside the box, but we need some change. We need to get that connection between our evidence and our practice. And this is one possible way for that to come to be. My reference slide is all messed up. I'm realizing I updated it and it went cattywampus, so I will fix it. It's here. I will fix it and resend it. See, I have 3 pages of references. So I'll provide that to you guys. So that gives us about 10 minutes for any questions. I hope I didn't run through too fast. I was definitely flying along. Let me look at and I will stop share. I'm going to say now, I look a little funny. I had a little incident, so my face might be a little funny, but
all good. It's all good.
Okay, so the question was, does manual guidance interfere with child-generated active movement? It is absolutely our intent to never interfere with the actual movement of the child. I will go with them. Now, do I have to sometimes contain? I don't want the child running out into the street or whatever, you know. But so bad intent maybe is limiting to, but not active movement itself. We are always looking for the movement to be theirs. And so I try and contain via how I set up the environment. If I know I have a child, I have to redirect a lot. If there's a lot of perseverative, behaviors or whatever, I'm working on how to take those and just, because that's an attractor too, right? That's just an attractor for something else, and just change it a little bit to make it different, to break up that attractor pattern and do something a little different. But we're never looking to inhibit, and we're never looking to make it look pretty. I'm never trying to get a perfect pattern of movement. I'm always trying to just get different generated movement and make it something task achievable. right? Whatever the child wants to do and get to. I want them to do it in a different way than they would do it otherwise. And I want to make it harder that they're doing something that's sort of the just right challenge for them, right? Pushing that comfort zone, but never to move. We have another one. Okay, so that's the only question in the. Oh,
Actually, Lisa, hi,
oh,
I'm Tara with
Gotcha.
Gillette Children's, and I'm helping
Yes,
moderate
great,
tonight. There are a few questions that were sent to me.
great.
People were having issues with the Q&A, so I'm just going to say to everyone, the Q&A is open, so please continue to drop your questions in there, but I will ask a couple that came to me.
Okay.
And one was, I know you say it's for all ages, but I feel like it would be pretty tricky with older kids. Is it?
So it's interestingly not. Now I'm in the younger group, but a lot of my team works with the older kids. And actually Joyce did a really nice poster on this. I want to say I'll find it and I can put it in the references for sections. Maybe it was before COVID, but it was for a teenage boy who's for self-feeding, and they were working on postural control so he could self-feed. In the beginning, he was very athetoid and he could not. And by the end of their, I want to say they worked something like 10 months, he was able to actually eat by himself with an adaptive spoon and bowl. But the thing that's nice for the older kids, especially if they've got some ability to give you some feedback, they can feel it. If you talk to them about what you're doing, they can feel it. So that's a really nice interaction. And I will often do that with an older child. But really, the older child is almost, in some ways, is easier because you know what the task, you're setting up a task for them because it's what they've maybe told you they want, that they want to do, or if they're nonverbal, you are working with them in maybe a little bit less. Generally, the older kids aren't running around quite as much. Let's say it that way, right? Than our toddler, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, So we can direct activities more finitely. So, for example, Ingrid did a great study on pronation with Reggie Harbone, where they were just working on at the foot and the lower leg, and they were able to get kids who were really pronated to actually get into walking, into standing, and being able to take some steps with a better aligned foot just from doing these activities. And they were able, because they were older and they were able to work in a very finite way, which with the little kids is more global.
Super. So this kind of piggybacks on that. When a child has a significant cognitive delay, how do you motivate self-generated movement?
Yes, probably the hardest kiddo, right? Because there's something to the will to move. And when we have a kid who might be very sort of low reception in their perception of opportunity, that's really the key, right? You're really trying to find anything that will make them interested. And so that is a difficulty, but that light touch perceptual information, that system is the vestibular system and the somatosensory system in our development is one of the earliest in utero, and it is one of the most accessible, even if we don't have vision, even if we don't have hearing, because it was so early on in its development in the fetus. So we often can get with that input and information and providing for a kid who's really low affect, maybe sometimes I have to be more like staccato and I'm actually working possibly on a research piece with this with a music therapist, but on how quickly I adjust my vector. And I find that for those low kids, if I'm really like, I'm here and then I'm here and then I'm here, I'm like giving my vector and a lot of change, a lot of quicker change, they'll often perk up more. Whereas some of my very active kids, I'm often going slower I want you to stay in this point of contact for a while. Can we stay here? Because that might be their problem. They can't stay. They want to go, right? So it's an adjustment per child, but that system is one of the earliest to develop. And because it's one of the earliest, it's usually there for you. And cognition is sort of perception and cognition kind of together in different things. And so that perception is what we need. It's nice if we can get some grounded cognition from that perception, but sometimes those things we just want the perception to move. Yeah.
All right. Wonderful. I am going to be a little bit sensitive to time here. I don't have any other questions, but Lisa, I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening on behalf of UCP and Gillette Children's and the research committee, and sharing this wonderful information that hopefully everyone can put into practice on their own institutions or facilities. So thank you.
Absolutely. And if you need more information, Perception Action Approach has a website.
Okay.
Slide, but and we have everything from online mentoring, all kinds of things, and a certification track for those that are interested. But we're also at conferences. We'll be around, so you can come. If you're at a conference, you'll see one of us doing something.
Well, perfect. We will share that link in our follow-up email to those that attended this evening. So thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to just share our next presentation is on December 14th. And I'm not even going to try to say Booma's last name. I can say her first name. And she will be speaking on dystonia and cerebral palsy updates and treatments. So please look, you will see that on the ucp.org website under News and Events and Research Committee Professional Learning Series is where you can find the link to register for that. You will see a QR code right now on your screen. Please scan that if you can. If you're not able to, we will send the link to the survey. But this is our evaluation for tonight's event, and we do take all of that information and feedback into consideration. So please, if you have the time, respond. You will receive a CME certificate with the link to today's recording, the link that Lisa just mentioned for, and I think that's it. And we did have one final comment that it was excellent. Thank you from South Africa. So thank you everyone for joining tonight, and we look forward to seeing you all on December 14th. And a special thanks to Lisa Pinson for joining us this evening.